Just look in front of you.
You got Marci.
The Wampanoags are about. I just wanted to say that Nois, Marci, Nutamas, Nasipia, Nutai, Hawachat. My name is Marci. Mashpee is my homeland, or my blood and bones, and I live in Harwich. I wanted to start and read a creation story to you. I thought would be wonderful to share. And then I'll go into talking about the history when the Pilgrims came, 1620, and read some stories to you. All right, so I'll start with the creation story. It's the circle of life in the clam bake. Everything in life is a circle. Everything is alive. The animals, the birds, the plants of the earth, and the plants of the seas, the water, the air, and the stones. And everything must be respected. All things are part of the earth, which gives us everything we need. We take from the earth, we must give back in return. The medicine circle is a source of our strength. So the Wampanoag people explain the way they have been instructed by the Creator. For untold centuries, the Wampanoag people of the First Light have lived the southeastern coast of Massachusetts, and their tradition and stories relate to the circle of life which human beings must strive to maintain. One of the heroes of the Wampanoag is a giant whose name is Mashap. Now, Mashap is actually a name of a boat that the Wampanoags have created, and they created by using trees and logs, and they burned it to form the log itself. In fact, there's an article after the presentation that they actually did a new one after 70 years of the first one that was made, the Wampanoag people. And they actually put it up to water, kids started rowing it, so I thought that was interesting, the Mashap. Some say he lived there on the narrow land now called Cape Cod even before the Wampanoags arrived. He was not alone, for there were other beings there with him. One of his friends was a giant frog, which was his closest companion. Mashap's life was a good one. He swam in the waters of Wampanoag Bay. He made great fires on the sandy beach to cook whales and other sea creatures. And when he emptied the sand into the sea from his great moccasins, he made the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. The Wampanoags became friends of Mashap, and he enjoyed helping them. When they wanted to cook or keep themselves warm, he would carry great loads of wood on his back for their fires. When they were hungry, he would drive whales onto the shores of the people so they did not have to hunt for food. He was so good to the people that they became lazy. Then Ketchon, the Great Spirit, spoke to Mashap. "It is good that you care for your younger brothers," Keton said, "but it's not right that you do everything for them. They are like little children, and when you care for all their needs, they must take responsibility for their own lives, or they will never grow. If you do not care for themselves, how can they care for the rest of creation? Their circle will not be strong." "It is true," Mashap said. Then he said goodbye to the people of the First Light. His small friends watched him from the cliffs of Gayhead as he waded into the bay, which was greenish-brown from the rockweed, and swam toward the west. As he swam, Keton, the Creator, transformed him into a great white whale. Mashap's friends, the giant frog, came to the cliffs, filled with sorrow at the loss of his friend. Keton took pity on the giant frog and change him into a huge stone, which still sits there at Gayhead, looking out to the sea. That stone reminds the Wampanoag that Teton cares for all things, and the decisions of the great mystery was made for the good of all. Without their friend to help them, the Wampanoag wondered how would they survive. They soon found, however, that when they worked for themselves, everything that they needed was there. One of those ways of survival which makes us use all of them is around. Earth, the plants, the animals, and the water is called by them Wampanoag. It is a word which means seafood cooking, and is because it is a special part of the circle. It is done to honor someone or to mark the change of the seasons. Yeah. So, what I wanted to say is, as I explained, I'll be giving history of the Wampanoags. And I'd like to reference two sources documents that I'll be using. One which is actually my grandfather's book. It's called The Indians of Old Cape Cod by Marion Bellemeyer. The other source is from our linguistics teacher at the Mashpee tribe, and her name is Jessie Doe Littlebeard. And she did a history of the Wampanoags and teaches the language. So I don't know if anybody remembers their history and about how the Wampanoags were introduced and how everybody got to know what it was like when the Pilgrims arrived, which was 1620. I thought it would be interesting to look a little beyond before that happened and what, because according to history, the Wampanoags have been here for 12,000 years. So they had other explorers that had come by, and in particular, there was one, let me see. So, the Wampanoags and the indigenous neighboring nations lived in this region without sustained European contact until the 17th century. Nearly every European voyage to the Wampanoag county ended in violence. So in 1603, the Englishman by the name of Martin Ping sailed the Discoverer into the New England waters. He stopped in P-Town, he erected a defensive barricade, and he sent his crew scrubbing for what's known as sassafras. And it's a plant that's indigenous to the Cape, and the reason why they're getting the sassafras is because they believed it cured the plague. So at that time, so the Wampanoags would come and see these boats that they'd never seen before, and these travelers, and they would trade tobacco, they would trade tobacco pipes, and when Martin Ping was tired of the Wampanoags, he would send the dogs, usually, and then they would scatter. But that was Englishman Martin Ping. In 1605, there was an explorer named Samuel Champlain. He was sent by France to explore the New World. He actually arrived in Nauset Harbor in October. He had wrote that at that time there were 500 to 600 quote-unquote savages ordained with feathers, beads, shells, weapons, consisting of bows, arrows, and clubs. At the time, Samuel did not think that they were good hunters. However, he said they were good fishermen and tillers of the soil. And what Wampanoags are known for is they grow corn, beans, squash, pumpkin, and tobacco. And there's a story, it's called a recipe called Three Sisters Rice. And what that consists of is corn, beans, and squash. And the reason why these three foods are grown together is that the corn is the pole, to help the beans up the pole, and the squash covers the beans for the soil, so it's rich in nutrients. And so they've often planted those three together because they're three sisters, and that's how they've been able to grow those vegetables. Okay, moving on. In 1616, There's a disease the medical researchers believe to be yellow fever. This arrived on the coast of Maine, likely by fishing traders. The sickness spread south to the Narragansett Bay, killing an estimated 2/3 of the Wampanoag Nation by the time the Pilgrims arrived on the shores of the current Cape Cod Bay in 1620. Prior to the sickness, there were 69 thriving Wampanoag villages. By 1677, there were only 14 Wampanoag communities. Traditionally, these are known as the praying towns, and they were the ones that had governed their own community. So this is starting to lead up to, you may have heard, King Philip's War. At the time, there was more explorers coming in, so there's more livestock, more people, and so the Wampanoags were being pushed further and further in different regions of the land. So this was starting to cause conflict. So in the natives, in their mind, nothing was sold. It was, they were giving to the land to the white settlers. It was because they were allowing them to fish and to hunt. They didn't see it as, that they would keep it. They did this type of trading with other neighboring nations. Okay, so I'm going to read some stories from the Indians of Old Cape Cod. There's quite a bit in here. And this is in regards to Massasoit. And Massasoit, he is the one that had died, and then his son is from Mattahomet, who's considered King Philip. This is how the war started. And it starts this. It says, in 1662, Massasoit died. His son, Wamsetta, succeeded, followed a short year later by his second son, Mattahomet, which is also known as Philip. The Indians continued to feel compressed as they were driven further into the forest. Lesser Chief Washapu went to Plymouth in December of 1668 to convince the governor that the land where axes were ringing was really his. My father's father owned that land, he insisted, while his friends crowded around in the courthouse uttering guttural sounds of approval. His protests were of no avail. Philip at Mount Hope watched anxiously over his people while the hawk and dove debate mounted. In 1660, Passaconaway, an elder statesman of the Pennacock tribe, part of the Wampanoag Federation, had lifted his voice in a dovish message. A great feast was held in his honor since he had passed beyond his 100th year, his life spanning the great era of European exploration and exploitation. Turning over his tomahawk of authority to his son, Wancelet, he lamented, Hearken to the words of your father. Hearken to the words of your father. I am an old oak that has withstood the storms of more than 100 winters. My eyes are dim, my limbs totter, soon I must fall. When young, no one could bury the hatchet in the sapling before me. My arrows could pierce the deer at 100 rods. No wigwam had so many furs, no pole had so many scallops as Pascomway's. Then I delighted in the war, the whoop of the Pennacocks, as we head on the Mohawk, and no voice was proud as the Pascomois. The English came, they seized the lands, they followed upon my footsteps. I made war on them, but they fought with fire and thunder. My young men were swept down before me when no one was near them. I tried sorcery against them, but they still increased and prevailed over me and mine. I gave my place to them and retired to my beautiful island, Natatook. I've had communications with the Great Spirit. I am powerless before the palefaces. These meadows they shall turn into the plow, these forests shall by the axe. The palefaces shall live upon your hunting grounds and make their villages upon your fishing places. The Great Spirit says this, and it must be so. We are few and powerless before them. We must bend before the storm. Peace with the white man is the command of the Great Spirit and the last wish of Pasquaney. No doubt, Philip waved Pasquaney's lament against the Hawks' outrage, but by 1672, the Hawks had won in the council chamber. The majority felt the Wampanoag should fight to protect their remaining territory. The bloody King Philip's War broke out, carrying the little people of the wigwam and the pioneer cabin into the Red Holocaust. The murderous struggle ended with the Wampanoags close to extinction. We wonder, did the Hawks really win? So in addition to that, which I thought was very interesting, her name is Ashawaks, and she was a squaw sachem. And the story goes, Ashawaks, the beautiful squaw sachem, one of the Wampanoags, was an unusual Indian leader in the Cape area during the mid-1600s. Like that other female ruler, Witamu, she was overshadowed by the colorful male chiefs in the sachems, Massasoit, Philip, Wampsetta, Anawam, Idaho, Aspinet, Kachinot. Yet Ashawaks remains a fascinating, vibrant figure, glimpsed tantalizing through the mists of history. Ashawaks ruled a small tribe called the Saugatucks, whose territory centered around the present Little Compton and Tiverton, Rhode Island. Apparently, the squaw sachem liked to visit the lands close to the neck of Cape Cod, and for old records showing her camping with her people at Onset, enjoying the beach at Mattapoisett, fishing at Wareham, visiting the town of Sandwich. It was rumored she occasionally stayed at Falmouth, her favorite encampment. However, was at the Susquehanna Point close to her tribal fishing grounds, where she loved to look over the sea. Though detailed personal description is not available, we are advised that she was imperious, beautiful, commanding in appearance. No doubt she was strong, tall, lithe, for these were characteristics of the Algonquin Indians, to which the Wampanoags belonged. She was changeable, willful, running through her domain as her mood demanded. Ashawaks held the complete loyalty of her squaws and braves, for they followed her wherever she rambled. There was another side to Ashawaks, however. The Plymouth government in 1671 described her as a female chief of great energy, character, and respected her power thoroughly. As English settlers penetrated her domain, they eyed her tribal wanderings. Would she remain friendly and peaceful, or would she join the great chief Mattapoisett, Philip, and his Indian Confederation? Ashawaks was about to be caught between two worlds. One world was represented by Philip, chief of all the Wampanoag tribes in the southeastern Massachusetts. A young, handsome, intelligent man, he was becoming increasingly concerned about the future of his people. His father, Massasoit, had been generous to the Pilgrims and other settlers, granting unlimited lands. Now Philip's inheritance had dwindled. He watched the exorbitant waves of settlers press his tribes back onto an ever-shrinking land. Philip realized the tribes must unite if they were to be preserved. He sent messages to Ashawaks and to other lesser chiefs, asking them to join his confederation. Ashawaks would not commit herself, calling on her to remember the fate of the Pequots, who were exterminated by the English. Philip asked her to stand with him, united against the English. On some occasions, she brushed aside his messengers. Other times, she called tribal councils to hear their words. Either she was Philistine female, or she would not believe that the English would harm her. Had she not sworn friendship with them? Could she not leave her lovely woodland paradise to ally herself with Philip against her new friends? Ashawaks' other world was represented by the dashing young English officer, Captain Benjamin Church. A friendship had developed between the two because Church was a representative of Plymouth to the Indians. Also, the two were neighbors, for Captain Church's home was not far from Ashawaks' household. Rumor says that there were more between them than the friendship, and the young Peter Ashawaks was their son. Of this, there was no proof. Old records only show that the captain occasionally spent the night at Ashawaks' camp, and that he and Peter were exceedingly friendly all their lives. The captain did all he could to keep the tribe peaceful and help the settlers and the Indians live happily side by side. One thing is clear, Captain Church was a strong influence on Ashawancks as the great Chief Philip. By April of 1671, tensions were high between the natives and the white after the young Englishman was found murdered in Dedham. The blame was placed on the Indians and one was hanged on Boston Common. Philip was rumored to be behind the deed, though there was no proof. Plymouth was up in arms. Philip was incensed and fearful. After a wary confrontation at the Taunton Meeting House between Philip and Plymouth officials, peace was maintained. Philip and his sachems, however, were obliged to give up some firearms, which they had purchased and honestly paid for. Ashawancks braves were irate, and only 11 guns were turned in. The squaw sachem had a difficult time calming her men. Philip increased his efforts towards a larger confederacy, and gradually the alliances grew. Still, Ashawancks held back. One day she listened approvingly to Philip's messages. Another day she welcomed Church, who urged her to trust the English and remain at peace. Gradually, the stage was set for the bloodbath that swept through New England in 1675. Hostilities began with Sassamon, a former scribe of Philip, revealed the details of Philip's plans to authorities at Plymouth. On January 29, 1675, he was found murdered and 3 Indians stood accused, tried by a jury of 12 white men and 8 Indians. They were found guilty. Philip was enraged that Indians were no longer allowed to head their own government. The burning of isolated buildings and killings of livestock began. Captain Church remained in close touch with Ashawancks, and in his account of the Indian Wars tells the following amazing incident. On June 15th, he received an urgent summons from Ashawancks to come to a war council. With his tenant's son, Charles Hazelton, he rode immediately from his farm, dismounting near the Indian village. The 2 men proceeded on foot toward a clearing as the cadence of the war drums grew louder. Hundreds of Indians were gathered together, dancing, singing, gesticulating in weird poses according to the custom in a war dance, said Church. Ashawancks, dancing like a wild woman in a foaming sweat, was leading the dance. On seeing her guests, she summoned them to join her in the council's braves. With astounding freedom, she told them that Philip had summoned her to a war dance at his headquarters at Mount Hope in Bristol, Rhode Island, in preparation for the war against the settlers. Was it true, she queried, the Plymouth government was gathering a huge army to invade the Indian lands? Captain Church was thunderstruck. Here was news of Philip the colonists knew nothing about. Could he get away from these frenzied Indians in time to warn Plymouth? Trying to hide his feelings, Church assured Ashawancks that he had recently come from Plymouth and heard nothing of any war plans. Would he be moving his family and goods near to be near her, if this was true, he asked. Unanswering, Ashawancks sent for Philip's 6 messengers, who made a formidable sight in their war paint as they approached. The captain was famous for his personality and powers of persuasion. Never did he need it more. Throughout the exceeding hours, the discussion waxed hot, then cooled. Ashawancks deliberated, questioned, debated with Philip's men, and with Church finally succumbing to the latter's influence. She eventually agreed to put herself under the care of the governor at Plymouth, rejecting Philip's demand, and insisted on sending Church home with a bodyguard. Church assured her that if she would keep her dependence on the English, she would stay safe in Saskatchewan. She would be safe. He promised to come to see her soon again. After leaving her presence, he dismissed her bodyguard and rode hurriedly to warn Plymouth of Philip's plans. Fighting broke out 3 days later on June 18th with the attack on Swansea, and soon developed in a full-blown war. Church had no time to go back with assurances that the Plymouth government would honor her requests for protection. He led his troops into battle time after time, always concerned about fulfilling his promise to see Assawax, but never finding the time to see her. Now the scene shifts from Assawax, waiting patiently for Captain Church's return to Mount Wachusett, sacred mountain of the Indians. The war was not going well for Philip, so he called a great powwow in the stronghold of the Nashwaas. He sent word to all his allies, and gradually they gathered at Mount Wachusett, while Assawax awaited Captain Church in vain. The weeks slipped by into months. On the mountain, amid sorties on Lancaster and Sudbury, etc., the great powwow gathered power, growing larger and more formidable, to the increased beat of the war drums. A high peak of frenzy was reached when Canchanot, brilliant chief of the Narragansetts and a former enemy of the Wampanoags, arrived with all their braves. But the real climax came when a band of strapping warriors pushed their way into the council circles to announce the arrival of the illustrious squaw sachem Assawax of the Sacred Bonnets. She had again changed her mind. Tired of sitting on the cliff, waiting for Church, anger and fear had finally seized her. Had Church turned against her because he had not come? Impulsively, one early spring day, she started through the forest with the braves to join the great powwow. Through March and April of 1676, the struggle raged between the warriors of Wachusett and the settlers. In spite of many Indian victories, the circle of the battle was closing inexorably around the Indians. Assawax could see the English were more powerful. It was too much for Assawax, and once again she changed her mind. She and her mighty bodyguard slipped through the enemy lines and left Philip to work on his own problems. Once again, she took up her vigil on the rock promontory at the Asquewan, hoping to see Church. Now the story returns to gallant captain who still felt guilty because of his unfulfilled promise to the squaw sachem. Almost a year to the day, Church last saw Assawax. He was returning from Plymouth to his home, busy with fighting and wrangling with the Plymouth officials about the conduct of the war, and occupied with a new son. His only regret was his word Assawax had left to join Philip. Seeing some Indians fishing off Assaquewan Point, he stopped to investigate. He was astonished to hear that Assawax had deserted Philip and was now back home, camped 3 miles away, leaving a message for a sachem's squaw to meet him there 2 days hence. He hastened to Plymouth. He informed them of Assawax's return and said he would visit her to enlist her braves against Philip. Though Plymouth officials were doubtful, warning that the Indians couldn't be trusted, Church returned to the point to be coldly greeted by Assawax. The wrath of the squaw sachem descended upon Church as he poured forth her pent-up feelings. Why had he waited so long to come? If he had come, she would never have gone to Philip, she declared. Church again summoned all his powers of persuasion and used them eloquently through the long afternoon as the council of braves discussed the war. Finally, Church persuaded Assawax and her braves to serve the English against Philip, in return for a guarantee of safety for her tribe and a promise that none would be shipped out to the country into slavery, which is what most feared. The meeting ended happily, and Church left to obtain the necessary assurances from Plymouth. Learning that the Major Bradford had arrived nearby with a large army, he detoured to be sure that Bradford would not upset his new arrangements with the Saskawans. Bradford was cold to the idea and refused to add her braves to his army. After an anxious 2 days of travel between both encampments, Church was able to keep the peace, though he mournfully watched Asquewan and her tribe move to Sandwich. Bradford insisted on this, so that Asquewan could be separated from Philip, and now had left the great powwow and returned to Mount Hope. Church placated Asquewan and raced to Plymouth to see the governor. Fortunately, the governor approved of Bradford's negotiations, and Church immediately returned happily to Sandwich. In his pocket was a permission to add Saquon braves to his troops, He also carried a pledge of friendship, the Squaw Sachem, church-bound Asquith's encampment at Onset, where Bradford had finally allowed her to camp. Triumphantly, he gave her the governor's message that a great feast was held, followed by the war dance. At the height of the festivities, each brave stepped into the ring, chanting his own song to signify his enlistment in the English cause. Asquith's inner chief assured Captain Church he could call on the braves any time against Philip. As a token of esteem, Asquith's presented Church with a very fine firelock and invited him to lodge in her camp overnight. After this dramatic scene, impetuous Asquith disappears behind the curtain of history. Though the time of her death is not known, but her grave may be seen in the Indian burial ground at Little Compton, Rhode Island. Apparently she and her people were allowed to live in peace at Saquon after contributing to Philip's downfall. The question still answered is was she willful or was she skillful? This clever squaw sachem has succeeded where the male chiefs failed. Asquith, through her intuition, has skillfully brought her people to the crush between cultures into peace and the new. So that's her story. That's interesting. Okay. Now, I wanted to close with a couple of readings here. Let's see. Now, there's a lot to be read. So I wanted to, and this was very beautifully written, this is about the language. The name of the language of Wampanoag is pronounced Wampanaong To Ahonk. It has been referred to by various names throughout history, such as Native Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Kosui, as well as others. The language is but one of 40 languages that comprise the Algonquin languages family, the largest geographical distribution of languages in the Western Hemisphere. There are two dialects of Wampanoag, mainland and islands. It was the first Native American language to employ an alphabetic writing system, and the Wampanoag people wrote many documents in the language beginning in the first half of the 1600s. In fact, today, the body of the Wampanoag written documents is the largest collection of Native written documents on the continent. These documents written in the languages tell us much about the Wampanoag Nation boundaries, since the place names within the Wampanoag Nations are written in Wampanoag language, and the villages within another nation's boundaries are written in that nation's language. The native written documents also speak to the contact experience as written by our Wampanoag ancestors. The first Bible produced on a printing press in North America was printed in Wampanoag in 1663 on the printing press at Harvard University. Today, this Bible, as well as other documents in the language, are the foundation of the Wampanoag language work that has earned critical acclaim and through film and the work of Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project's co-founder and its linguistics, Jesse Little Bill Baird, is also from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. There's now a Wampanoag preschool and kindergarten class taught in the language and staffed by the dedicated group of language speakers. And actually they've added plans to add grades 1 through 12 to teach the Mashpee Wampanoag language. So, yeah. And our philosophy is based on the understanding that there is a balance between the ingredient required for sustainable life. Both our land and our people have thrived sustainably as part of the greater circle of life. We understand that creation has given us many privileges as well as responsibilities. The earth, the sun, the moon, the wind, our waters, and all living beings, our language and understanding of the world are all privileges. We also recognize our responsibility to be stewards of these gifts and to take care of our sisters and brothers. Our philosophy includes being mindful that the actions we take and that work that we do now will have a direct effects on the 7 generations to come after us. Our children have historically been object of great love and care. Traditionally, a child was never physically punished by anyone in the community. Children were spoken to, and and was a mark of strong adult, and was a mark of a strong adult when a child was convinced of a good way to conduct oneself. We live this philosophy of privilege and responsibility still today on our approach to decision-making of our families, as well as the tribe and our neighbors. There are many traditional creation stories about the formation of land, the waters, as well as the Wampanoag man, woman, girl, and boy, and also mythical creatures. The tribe has a rich history of storytelling where these stories teach lessons and reflect our philosophy. Our history was traditionally kept orally, and each person developed a sharpened skill for repeating exactly what was said. And this was also a method to recall and recite agreements between the individuals and tribes. During the 17th century and after, the tribe recorded history in language. Today we have many tribal citizens who both enjoy telling and writing stories, both in English and Wampanoag. There are many traditional ceremonies. They're held for seasonal occurrences, such as the arrival of herring, for many other reasons, including naming, healing, death, birth, Thanksgiving, marriage, and cleansing. Ceremonial life and prayer is still important to us today. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Lori?
What side of your family is the Wampanoag?
On my mother's side, so my grandfather is part Wampanoag. Any question?
The story about Ashwanka, is that in that book, and is that book available?
I don't know if this book is, because this is my grandfather's book, so I'm not sure if it is.
It hasn't been really published.
Right, yeah, so that was, I didn't know anything about her. It was
Yeah.
very fascinating. And,
Fascinating.
yeah. Yeah, there's quite a bit of history, and to be honest with you, they just celebrated the memory of King Philip's War, which is was the 345th anniversary. So Biden declared it to be a national holiday in recognition of the Indigenous people. So, yeah.
Marci, who published that book?
The Indians of Old Cape Cod.
Indian what?
The Indians of Old Cape Cod who published it. Let's see. It says WMS Selwood Publishing, Taunton, Massachusetts.
Who will have so many names of the streets and places?
Yes.
From Wampanoag.
Marci, is it correct that the tribe is concentrated?
Most of them are in Mashpee. There's 2,800 Wampanoags, and most of them are in Mashpee, or 25 miles outside of Mashpee.
When did that happen?
I'm sorry?
When did that happen?
Oh, when did that?
Or over time?
Over time, yeah. Because there's, the Aquinas on Martha's Vineyard, and at the time when the Wampanoags, Mashpee Wampanoags, were in process of trying to be a federally recognized tribe, which didn't happen until 2007. And
Don't forget the microphone.
oh, I'm sorry. The Mashpee Wampanoag tribe did not get federally recognized until 2007. I was told that we could have received recognition even earlier, but we would have had to give up our fishing rights, our Aboriginal rights. So we decided not to do that and to go through the process. So 34,000 pages later, we finally received recognition. In fact, there's a article in the Cape Cod Times of the year prior to that where we had gotten the agreement, and the papers were in place for getting recognition, which was the following year. So it's been a long struggle, to say the least, but we keep strong.
You hear about the Trail of Tears, but to be honest with you, I don't know what tribe that might have been.
I believe that was the Navajos.
Navajos.
Yeah, I don't know much about the Trail of Tears.
Southern tribe.
Southern tribe.
Southern tribe, which you went to Florida.
Yes. Did anybody else have any questions?
I wanted to ask about the museum, about the Mashpee Museum.
Yes.
Is that open regularly right now?
Actually, they just opened. They were closed for quite a while for COVID. They're open like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so they are open to the public.
Great.
So, yeah, that's a lot of good history there. In fact, that's where we have like a little, the herring run is right there for the museum.
As a volunteer at the Brooks Library, I know there are a lot of books by your ancestors, and they're all over in there. Go upstairs and go to the left. There's a lot of books about Harwich, and then included are many, many books about the Native American population. And by
And here, over here. You can't hear her over here.
Yeah, can you repeat?
You said there's a lot of books about the Wampanoag at the Brooks Library in Harwich Center.
by her ancestor. Is it Villamar?
Villemeyer, yeah, Marion Villemeyer.
Quite a lot of
So
books
there's
by
a lot
her.
in
If
Harwich,
anybody's interested,
Yeah.
there's tons of them.
which is good, yeah, because I know at the Mashpee Library too, they have a whole section of books from the Native Americans. A lot of good resources.
Can you clarify for me the relationship of the Wampanoag and Mashpee and so on? Did Wampanoag cover the larger territory, and then there are smaller groups within the...
Well, yes, the Wampanoags do. There's actually 3 bands. There's the Herring Pond, which is like, they have Plymouth, and then the Mashpee Wampanoags, and then the Aquina Wampanoags.
But also like the Nauset Indians on the outer Cape of Wampanoag.
Right, correct.
How far does it, so the whole of Cape Cod now, the woman that you read about, she was down in Rhode Island as well, right?
Right.
So was she part of the Wampanoag or different?
She was part of that, but she's part of her own tribe.
Some of us don't have these papers. Can you explain what they are?
Oh, sure. So the first one is, this was from our linguistics, Jesse Little Doughbeard. It's the Wampanoag Nation Tribal Linguistic Territory. So the other neighboring tribes, such as there's the Pequot in Connecticut, the Nipmuc, which is in the middle, like western Mass. So these are all the surrounding tribes. Some are only state recognized, not federally recognized. So that's, and they said that, so the Mohegan and Pequot territory west of the Connecticut River after 1620. And a lot of these tribes had to, part of it is that they wanted to establish their own governments. They didn't want to be told, what to do with their lands. And, right. But yeah, there was a lot of movement. So that's in regards to the linguistics. And then the other one, actually I have a better copy. This was actually for all the different, because the Mashpee Wampanoags are under a lot of different names. They're called different names. So there's different settlements on the Cape, in Buzzards Bay and Nantucket. There's the Sipowitz, Conkets. Some of these are really hard to pronounce. There's Nopsicot. So that's where, like Lori was saying, there's a lot of street names, these tribes.
Didn't the King Philip's War though spread to New York, New York State, and really the whole
thing, Rhode Island,
whole northeastern territory?
Right, that's where he's actually buried on Mount Hope in Rhode Island. Yep.
Marci, how long have you known that you were Native American?
Good question. To be honest with you, I knew, but I didn't know to what extent. My family, we didn't grow up in Mashpee. I grew up in Dennis. We went to the powwows, which was once a year in July. But until I started working with the Wampanoag people, and I work in the housing department, it was a real eye-opener, because I didn't know a lot about our culture, our language, just the general state of the Wampanoags, the historical trauma.
Did you have your DNA done? Is there any way or?
Actually, it's not through blood quantum, it's through lineage. So if you can show your lineage, then we have a enrollment person who, you have to provide, who your parents are. There's different families, part of the Popnik family, which is descendants from Blind Joe Amos, who's a preacher at the church. And then there's just different families, the Frys, Popniks, Hicks, just Tobys, a lot of large families. But again, it depends on where your lineage is. Now, a lot of times when they've asked people if they want to be on the rolls, even though they may be with a family that's already enrolled, some may not get on those rolls due to they haven't participated in any of the Wampanoag events. So there's a lot of more restrictions, and sometimes they will close the rolls. And, some people, there'll be like a moratorium and they have to wait. I was fortunate that my mom was able to get me and my brother on the rolls, and I was able to get Josh and Emily.
How does Josh feel about it?
Might have helped him in school.
Josh has had the privilege of participating in a lot of the tribal activities. There is, 2 years ago, they had an arbor that Josh and some of the other tribal youth were able to build by hand to the tribal elders. It's an arbor on behind our government center where the men meet and discuss. And he's been on fishing trips and, just anything involving cultural activities. They're always thinking of him with college, and, so he's been very fortunate, very fortunate. Same with my daughter.
Was it taught in your schools with the curriculum at some point? Is the Native American history of Cape Cod taught in curriculum in the schools? Because you mentioned about the Wampanoag school, but I'm thinking about the regular public schools.
Yep.
There is.
There is, yes. They're doing it at the Mashpee schools and the Quashnet school. In fact, they're having like a flag raising on the 12th.
Okay.
But they've definitely been
added it
to their curriculum, yes.
Great.
I just have to say, anybody who has not been to the Wampanoag Museum, it is amazing. It really should go. It is
Yeah,
just
definitely.
fabulous.
Anybody else have any questions?
I know that, I was going to say, I know that they're allowed to fish without a license at a different time. My cousin's granddaughter has 3 sons, and they're allowed to fish. And she gets very irate because people come and say, you can't fish here.
Because even a few years ago, my brother, my half-brother, my father's side, we went to the Cape Cod National Seashore to do some clamming. And, I had my tribal ID. We issued a tribal ID, and she says, I shouldn't even be looking at this, but they have to check. And then my brother and I had, because you can only have so many clams, and we had 2 full buckets of clams, and this gentleman walked by and he says, how'd you get 2? And my brother says, tribal, and it just keeps walking.
Before people start to break up, did you make a declaration that the president issued?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Yep. Yeah, thank you, David, for bringing this in. I was going to read this regarding the Indigenous Peoples Day, and it was, states that President Joe Biden on Friday issued the first ever presidential proclamation of the Indigenous Peoples Day, lending the most significant boost yet to efforts to refocus the federal holiday celebrating Christopher Columbus toward an appreciation of Native peoples. Biden also issued a proclamation of Columbus Day on Monday, which is established by Congress. For generations, federal policies systematically sought to assimilate and displace Native people and eradicate Native cultures. Biden wrote in the Indigenous Peoples Day proclamation, "Today, we recognize Indigenous peoples' resilience and strength, as well as the immeasurable positive impact they have made on every aspect of American society." In a separate proclamation on Columbus Day, Biden praised the role of the Italian Americans in the U.S. society, but also referenced the violence and harm Columbus and other explorers of the age brought about on Americas. Today, we also acknowledge the painful history of the wrongs and atrocities that many European explorers inflicted on tribal nations and indigenous communities, Biden wrote. It is a measure of our greatness as a nation that we do not seek to bury these shameful episodes of our past, that we face them honestly, we bring them to light, and we do all that we can to address them. It is a break from President Donald Trump's ardent defense of intrepid heroes like Columbus. Yeah. And I know the food smells really good. If I could just end with a prayer. This is, his name is Guy Cash. He's our medicine man. He's Soaring Eagle. Yes, Josh, please say it.
Creator of all creations, hear my prayers, for I am weak. My heart is heavy, not steady on my feet, as I dwell in a place some not dare, not knowing my next sunshine, my next breath of air. So life's memories of youth fade away, I still struggle with my haunts from day to day. So with my haunts that dwell inside of me, I pray someday to be free, free from all the guilt, shame, and low self-esteem. So I come to you, great Creator, to help become clean. So with no reservations, I give myself to Thee, with hope You'll listen and help me become free. And as I rise from the ashes, from my knees to my feet, a fire in front of me of this field, I feel complete. So I give this tobacco of prayers, not knowing from the eagle You'll receive. I ask for Your knowledge, the strength, enlightenment, and reprieve. So the journey of truth I do seek, hoping to be whole and complete all my revelations. From the Mashpee Wampanoag Medicine Man, Soaring Eagle.
We have refreshments.
Yes.